You're listening to Best Forevers, a podcast for kindred spirits, a podcast that encourages you to love more on your friends and to further consider the issues that plague friendships. I'm Alysa Lucas, and if you're anything like me, you've been on far too many Zoom meetings in the last few weeks, am I right? And let me guess, at least one person on those calls says, "Can you hear me?" or "Can you hear me now?" And your response is yes, and you're referring to their volume. But then I wonder, do you actually listen when they're talking? Or how well do you think you are at listening when others are talking? This brings up one of my classic teacher jokes. I could play basketball every day, but that doesn't make me LeBron James, right? I believe that we often think we're better at listening than we actually might be, and that is quite important for friendship when considering support, understanding, being non-judgmental, being there for friends is critical to the function of friendship. So to follow last episode about be the friend you wish you had, I wanted to explore listening in friendships. How many times have we wished we had a friend that was truly listening to us? I'll talk about listening in general, how it fits into friendships, and tips where we can all become better at it for our friends. I remember learning in my classes as a young student that we spend about 70% of our day listening, which is more than any other communication activity, including talking. But more recent research says that we spend about 70 to 80% of our day communicating, with 45% of it dedicated to listening specifically, which still, even with the older research and the newer research, would show that listening is the most common daily communication activity that we participate in. But I've always wondered how much of that percentage of listening is what we might call good listening. There's certainly a difference between hearing and listening, hearing being sounds actually hitting our eardrums, like having music on in the background, or more like me, having TV on in the background, but maybe not paying attention to it per se. I imagine a lot of my students have music or TV on in the background when they're studying. That would be an example of hearing, right? It's not the primary focus, right? But that's not what we want to consider our friends to be. They're not music in the background. They're not a TV show that we're not paying attention to. Listening, though, is so much more. And unfortunately, there's so many factors that can get in the way of listening, even when we have the best intentions to do so. So I was checking out this 2015 article from Elite Daily webpage by Ashley Grates, focusing on why being a good listener is critical to friendship. In her article, Grates quotes Dale Carnegie, quote, "People are not interested in you. They are not interested in me. They are interested in themselves, morning, noon, and after dinner," end quote. And in that article, because we want to be liked, we want to be cool, and we want to be remembered, we spend far too much time talking about ourselves, our stories, our experiences, our feelings, and then we're likely to spend a lot of time when someone else is talking, A, thinking of what we're going to say next, B, interrupting to share an idea or a similar experience, and C, trying to show that we are understanding and like each other, like we have something in common by comparing an experience that we've had. But listening is a skill, and like other skills, we can learn and practice. Some of us might be the LeBron James of listening, while others of us might feel good just being on the listening team. One way to get us to start thinking about listening is to have folks in our head, like who would we consider to be role models for listening? Who are the folks that make us feel good when they listen to us? Who do we observe that has top-notch listening skills as they interact with other people? Have those people in mind so we can start thinking about how we can emulate those things. It doesn't mean copy or be just like them. It means they're inspiration to being good listeners for our own friends in ways that make sense for who we are as a person. This may be no surprise to anyone who is listening to this podcast, and this not being your first episode, but one of my favorite listeners is comedian and podcaster Gareth Reynolds, who was a guest for the episode number 25, The Devil Inside You, where we talked about how friendship plays a role in comedy and collaboration. And as you might remember, he is a co-host of The Dollop. The Dollop is a comedy history podcast him and Dave Anthony released once a week at least. And in those episodes, essentially, Dave is reading a story from history that Gareth knows nothing about. So his primary goal is to provide the entertainment of responding to those stories, much like we might, but with better timing and better jokes than maybe a lot of us can come up with, right? He might be the LeBron James of improv comedy, okay? So you got to check him out. He's hilarious. But for now, let's talk about his listening abilities that can be noted. A, when you listen to The Dollop, and also B, when you watch any of their videos on All Things Comedy YouTube channel. His primary goals and the ways I've observed him listening is to improv and create jokes based on the information he knows nothing about, or very little about. So it is a little different than, say, listening to a friend who's experiencing a problem, but I think a lot of understanding him as a listener can be applied to a whole host of situations. So number one, the thing that I've observed is that when he is listening, he makes excellent eye contact, right? In fact, he doesn't break it. And so in some ways you might be like, so he stares. And it's like, no, he's listening intently. And you can see that in his nonverbals because he does make eye contact. And he participates in nonverbal behaviors that show he is listening. So facial expressions, other body movements, leaning in. So he does a lot of things to show that he is all on board to listening in this particular interaction. Number two, although he's listening to respond specifically to what co-host Dave is saying, he has to be mindful of the timing for a joke so that it lands, but also so not to interrupt Dave's flow while reading him the historical story. So one of the things is that when we're listening to friends, we also don't want to interrupt. That timing in what we say is important, and knowing when to be quiet and knowing when to speak up is an incredible skill in terms of listening, and Gareth Reynolds definitely does that. Number three, he shows listening by asking questions to clarify and understand what he is hearing. So when I'm listening to the show, I have the luxury to rewind when I'm like, wait, what did he say? What is this about? And he doesn't have that luxury when they're recording an episode or they're at a live show. So he has to ask questions that are relevant, that help him understand it. And oftentimes those questions can also be part of the joke. But that's what we want to do, is that when we are listening, to fully understand what's going on, to comprehend what's going on, in a lot of cases, to understand the feelings of our friends, we need to ask them significant questions. Okay. Number four, he shows he's listening by bringing back topics from earlier in the episode, and he does that to make new jokes or to continue a joke, or hashtag what I learned from him, hashtag callback, right? Is that we can do that in conversation. So when we're listening to our friends, remembering the things they said so that we can bring them up later shows that we're listening to them, and it could be important to helping them understand their feelings or helping us understand their own, and just being the best listener that we can be. And then finally, I would say, and I'm sure there's more reasons, these are what I guess I would say are the top five. And I do use Gareth Reynolds as a listener, as an example, in my interpersonal communication class. So these are some of the things that the students and I talk about. So the final one here is this. He shows his dedication to listening by decreasing distractions. And for him on a show, that might mean calling out hecklers, so rude, or telling loud folks to shut the heck up, right? He cannot be good at what he does if he cannot actively listen. So one of the things is, typically we don't yell at people, but he has the right in his shows to do so, especially if people have paid to hear his jokes, right? And if he can't understand what's happening, if he can't be able to concentrate on what Dave is saying, then nothing else can happen. So although we might be able to think we're good at multitasking, like I can listen to my friend while we watch this TV show or while I'm on my phone. Here's the thing, spoiler alert, no, you can't. And not only that, it might come across as you're not truly listening to them, even if you're trying to while you're playing a game on your phone or scrolling through Twitter. So there's different types of situations when we need to listen. I would especially think that if a friend is going through something, this ain't a time to look at your Snapchats, right? So I think there are a lot of things that we can take away from what Gareth Reynolds does when he listens and applies to our own situations when we're talking with our friends. So let's, though, go back to sort of the roots of listening and talking about what it all means. So in classes, I have to start with that basic difference between hearing and listening, as I've already mentioned. But one of the tasks I think that's important in class is to show that listening is a lot more complicated than we think it is, but also that we can work on it. So a lot of times we might shy away from things that are hard. And here's the thing. Things that are hard can be really worth it. And being an excellent listener, being an empathic listener, like these are all going to make you a better friend, right? And so, and in other situations, right? Of course, this is a friendship podcast, but that doesn't mean a lot of what we talk about doesn't apply to our other relationships, to other close ones, to other people that we care about. So to show that listening is a complicated process, let's talk about the 5 steps to active listening. It's not just like, I'm listening. No. It reminds me of Fraser Crane. He would have, on that TV show, he had the talk show on the radio. It's like, I'm Dr. Fraser Crane. I'm listening. And the thing is, we would expect that therapists and doctors are excellent listeners, right? Because that is why we go to them, right? That is what therapy is partially about. You listen to me and help me work through my problems, or you empower me to help me work through my own problems, right? But there is more than just being like, I'm listening. There is a 5-step process. Number 1 is receiving. So this is much like Gareth yelling at the hecklers, for example. You can't listen if you're unable to hear and see the other person. So our ability to listen is usually disrupted by noise. And that can be physical noise. It also can be other things that are just disruptive. Like in communication classes, we talk about noise as part of the communication model, which includes a sender and receiver and feedback. But there's always noise. And that is there noise in our head? Like, so are we someone who's distracted easily? Or, you're thinking about your grocery list, or you're thinking about a problem you're having with your partner, or are you thinking about cats on TikTok? I don't know. But we can be just, it can disrupt the listening process if we're thinking about other things. Also, if we don't understand the words that someone used, can be part of noise. Even something like a blinking, flashing light that is distracting and you just keep looking at it can make it problematic for listening. So we have to enhance our ability to receive information, improve our ability to listen by becoming more aware of the type of noises that we experience specifically or in a specific context, like let's say a light bulb is going out and you might be like, let's go in a different room. But we need to think about those things so we can adjust our interactions accordingly. So it always reminds me of thinking about like parents and kids. Can you look at me when I'm talking to you? That would be an example of receiving. Can you turn off the TV while we talk? I have something important to tell you. You can put your phone away. That would be someone else controlling the situation and saying they need someone to give them attention. But also as listeners, we can do better, or we can be more mindful of how we receive information and improving the situation the best. Because if we can't receive information, nothing else can follow, right? Because we're not being able to even take in the information at all. So let's say you're looking at your parent, or you've put your phone away, or you've turned the TV off, or you paused your movie. The second step is attending. And this step involves actually devoting the attention to the listener and the interaction. So just because I'm looking at someone doesn't mean I'm listening, right? Or just because I've hit pause on the movie doesn't mean I am listening to what you're saying. So typically, though, when we do pay attention, we listen to things that are important to us. So how many of you have done that before where someone else is like, oh my God, did you hear them talking about the blah, blah, blah? And you're like, no, it's not important to me. I didn't even think about it, right? So if you're with friends and let's say you're at a friend's house and you hear someone across the room talking about something that you really care about, that's going to pique your interest and then you're going to go pay attention, right? For some of us, we don't pay attention to those things. Like, I don't notice cars like some of my friends do, right? A car driving down the street, they pay attention to that. I'll be like, just don't hit me, car. That's when it becomes important to me to paying attention. But we also pay attention to things that are unexpected or strange. But there's other times to pay attention, right? There's other times, or we need to make something important to us so that we are going to put that intention in. So you need to be aware of your ability to attend and make adjustments. So one of the examples I typically give in my classes is that when I was in graduate school as a PhD student at Penn State University, hashtag we are, get fired up for hierarchical linear modeling is what I tried to do when I was a student. So I had to take the statistics class called hierarchical linear modeling. We're going to call it HLM because that's the acronym, and saying hierarchical is hard. Say it 5 times fast. But one of the things is that stuff, although it's important for my degree, I'm just like, it sounds like the teacher in Peanuts, and it's like, no offense to my stats teacher, it's just like, it sounds like, right? So I'm not really into it. So I had to find a way to get adjusted so that I was paying attention, taking copious notes. I would drink a Mountain Dew before going in. I wouldn't sit by my friends. I did whatever I could do to receive the message, and then committed to attending to the messages during class time. Okay? So those are some of the things. We have to make things important, or we're going to miss the information. We're not going to be able to listen. So, because frankly, as humans, right, we do what we want to do. We listen to what we want to listen to. Okay? Number 3 in the 5 steps of active listening is understanding. So when we receive information, we must interpret the meaning of it and compare it to information that we already have. So I am not a fan of math, right? I'm sure if I wasn't put into what people called the dumb kids class for math in elementary school, that maybe I could have been a little bit more into it, but I was not. So when people start talking about math, I'm lost, right? So I could be receiving, I could be attending, but the understanding part, I'm trying to compare it to information I've received in the past. Like, this does not compute with what I know about math. And then I have to ask questions, or I'm lost, right? So we have to figure it out, right? We have to figure out the meaning. And that goes into step 4, which is responding, right? What makes someone believe that you are listening to them? Thinking about the eye contact and the nonverbals that Gareth Reynolds participates in. But the main thing is feedback. So when we're responding, we're communicating our attention and understanding to the person we're talking to our friend. And a receiver can provide negative and positive feedback through both verbal and nonverbal cues. We do something called back channeling. It's like the, yep, yeah, I know what you mean. Oh, really? Oh, no, he didn't, right? It's those sorts of things, plus head nods. Mine was a little of an intense version of it, but that could be an example of it. You could have eye contact, you could paraphrase, you could ask questions to help better your understanding. So if we go back to step 3, it could be like when Gareth is like, I have no idea what's happening in this case, so he asks a question. That is a way to show that he's responding. He's giving feedback, right? So feedback, though, and this is an interesting point, feedback has such a strong impact on the person who is talking. Positive feedback, it validates the speaker, makes them feel good. And negative feedback can make the speaker feel like they're not doing so good, right? So I think of this as a teacher, and anyone out there as a teacher, you know, the people who are like the head nodders and the people who are really engaged in class, like, you look for those people because their positive feedback makes you feel like you're doing a good job and you should keep going. I always tell my students that think about the feedback you're giving during presentations and classes, because it could have an impact on how the speaker continues, because if they don't feel like they have that listener support, then they could probably crash and burn even maybe more so than they are. And, you know, I know it's hard to listen to a lot of speeches, and it's hard to listen, but showing without being obnoxious, like super head nodding and, you know, all that kind of stuff, like relax, but you could also show them that you are there to support them. And you want to avoid behaviors that could be mistaken as negative feedback. And here's the thing, we are definitely in control of our nonverbals, right? So that is something that people can do. So the final step of active listening, remember, it's much more complicated than being like, I'm listening. The ears are open, right? Is recalling, and this step entails remembering information after you received it, attended to it, understood it, and responded to it. And generally, we judge people's ability to listen based on how accurately they can recall information, which might be a little unfair, but if you misunderstand because of receiving and intending, the rest of the steps in recall are just kind of screwed. So, a parent might say to a child, "What did I just say to you?" to show that they're listening. And so that's why I think Gareth is so great at listening, because he's able to bring those things back in later. And I think that can be really helpful, that people know that you're listening, even if it isn't in the same conversation. Touching base and being like, the other day you were really talking about how you felt about this. And since then, it made me think of this, and I just wanted to share it with you. Though, even in a different interaction, you can show that you were listening to them at a previous time. And I think that is a great way to do it. Students, of course, know that recalling from listening in class is going to be, say, an exam. And in a workplace, it might be getting a task done after you were told to do it and you were given instructions. So recalling is something that we base it on. And I think, like, even if that might be a little unfair in some ways, because not everyone, like, for example, is a good test taker, or people need to take notes, which can be part of responding. You can show you're listening by taking notes. But I do think it could be a really nice indication in a friendship that you care. So, although those are the 5 steps, they're very complicated. And obviously, when we're talking here, we are assuming that people have sight and hearing, and we're not thinking about people who might live with, difficulty hearing or difficulty with sight. So that can also, there's other ways to communicate, right? Sign language and other things of that nature that we would have to consider. So I did want to point that out, that this is all assuming that everyone is able-bodied, right? And not even taking into account ADHD and other things like that that might play a role. Like, there's a lot of factors that might make understanding each other and communication more difficult. So a couple other things I wanted to mention before we get into some tips of how we can get into the friendship aspect of it specifically is that we have different styles of listening. So some of us are action oriented, which means we want brief, to the point, accurate messages, and then we want to be able to help make decisions or initiate action. And we can, if you're action oriented, sometimes you might grow impatient if the person is talking too much or doesn't seem organized in some way. And a lot of people who might fall under this style are problem solvers or want to solve problems. This is different from people who might be time oriented. They believe in brief and concise encounters. They might be considered someone who's really connected to the clock and time, often looking at watches and let people know in advance how much time they have. And sometimes that notion of looking at the watch is something that would indicate to the person that is talking that there's some sort of imposition. So if it is a situation with a friend, and you don't have time to listen at that moment because you're going to something, or you have a Zoom meeting, or something like that, it can be like, can I call you in 45 minutes so I can give you my undivided attention, something like that. We call that a feed forward. It's letting people know how much time you have, and that way it's sort of, hey, do you have 10 minutes so I can tell you about this? Or do you have time for me to vent? Or, oh, I know that you are really down. I have about 20 minutes before I have to head into work. So we can start now, but maybe we can finish it later. It's just being mindful that we don't want it to come across as something negative or problematic because people don't have time. We want to give our friends the time, but sometimes we need to communicate that to them. Some people are people-oriented, so they are listening for an opportunity to establish commonalities between themselves and others. They're concerned with people's emotions, and they demonstrate empathy. They can be high in communication competence. Unfortunately, though, at times, trying to establish commonalities might not be the goal of the interaction. It might be to simply listen, right? So people who are people-oriented want to be mindful of that so that they are not invalidating the other person's feelings, because they also want to get in there. So sometimes it's not about bonding, And sometimes it might just be letting the friend vent, and then maybe it's your time another time, right? The last one is content oriented. They prefer to be intellectually challenged by the messages they receive. So, having complex information to work through and evaluating facts before forming opinions. They're going to ask clarification and challenging questions, and it might be more of a cognitive complexity thing than anything else. But also, it could be debates and other things, and having conversations in that way. So listening for arguments and then developing their own arguments, which can be fun in friendship to do that, but maybe not breaking through someone's argument when they've been broken up with might not be the time for that, right? So much like that, when thinking about the style and thinking about Gareth Reynolds as an example, we do have to consider that there are different functions to listening. We're listening to comprehend, which means listening to understand, being able to more accurately and interpret and recall information. That was what Gareth is trying to do, is trying to comprehend the story. The next thing we can do in terms of a function of listening is to discern. So you're distinguishing one sound from another. And some of you are so musically gifted that you can tell the difference. Like, I watch The Voice. I love that show. And they'll talk about people's notes and stuff. And I was like, I just heard music. I heard singing. I have no idea what you're talking about. So I don't have that ability to listen and discern different sounds there. But because of my communication background, I might be able to look at someone and discern how they might be feeling. Right? If they're feeling agitated, if they look sad, those sorts of things. And that can be very helpful, being able to discern if your friend might not be willing to just go into what they're talking about. Like if you're getting together and you're hanging out and they just don't seem right, being able to discern that they don't seem like themselves is an important skill. Like you're listening and you're like, wait a minute, something doesn't seem right. What's going on? The third function would be to analyze, and that would be evaluating messages you're receiving and judging it. That judging it might not be a good idea for a friendship situation. We're looking often for our friends to be non-judgmental, so that function might not always be in play. Appreciation, that is to simply enjoy the sounds. So sometimes there are voices in our life. Like I love Phoebe Judge from Criminal. She can read the side of a cereal box and I would listen because I enjoy the sound. Or we listen to music to enjoy the sound. So listening to appreciate might not be entirely what a conversation between friends might be about, but maybe after you have that conversation and then you're like, hey, have you heard the new Harry Styles album? Let's listen to it together and enjoy the sounds, right? Or going to the Dollop to listen to them joke and listening to their laughs, and that can be enjoying sounds, for example. And then finally, ding, 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 I think we found the best one, although comprehend and discern are definitely up there for friendship conversations, is support, where you provide comfort and, let's be sure everyone hears this part, you suspend judgment. You take in without analyzing, and this is where you can openly express empathy. So even if we're thoughtful about taking the 5 steps and being active and considering the type of style that would be best for a situation or the purpose of a listening session, we can still be challenged at listening because it is hard, mainly because of noise, but because we're making these considerations, we're at least chasing LeBron James's record, so to speak. So that's at least a step in the right direction, okay? So, and the considerations and choices we make definitely impact our relationships. For example, do you know someone who's action-oriented in their listening, but you were hoping for them to simply listen to your situation without solving it? Have you been the person who immediately jumps into brainstorming and fixing someone when they're looking to vent? From the point of view of the friend, the action-focused listening may seem insensitive or invalidating. And from the point of view of the listener, it might be like, why does my friend never take my advice? They're always talking about the same thing and they don't do anything about it. So as you can see, this disparity between the goals during a friendship interaction may cause conflict. So what should listening be about in friendships? If we turn to the friendship qualities that we talked about in the last episode, Be the Friend You Wish You Had, the top qualities that I received from students and friends were support, much like that listening function, humor, loyalty, honesty, empathy, trust, and listener was number 7. Although listening is listed as the seventh quality we look for in a friendship, there is some sort of role in each of the other qualities, and probably most important in the quality we probably hope for the most in friendships, and that is support. As that Ashley Greats article mentioned, we want to be liked, we want to be cool, we want to be remembered, but I'd also add that we want to be acknowledged, we want to be heard, we want to be understood, we want to be respected, and we want to be validated. And listening is how we can help do all those things for our friends. So according to a post by Brigitte Olin on Positive Psychology webpage, we make some mistakes when we're listening, which we're all probably guilty of at one time or another, including the person who's talking about listening on her friendship podcast. We're not all perfect, right? Even though some of us have some perfectionism issues. Topic for another time. So here are the 4 common mistakes we make according to that article, some of which might be mentioned, but a good refresh right before we go into tips. Daydreaming or thinking of something else, even as simple as making your list of groceries, nailed it, while another person is speaking. Thinking of what to say next. So we think faster than someone speaks. So we're always trying to get in there like it's a round of double dutch. You're just leaning in and trying to get in there on jumping, but the person who's doing the double dutch is just taking far too long, right? The third mistake that we make is judging what the other person is saying. So we're like, oh my God, those sorts of things can be problematic. And then we're listening with a specific goal or outcome in mind. So if you are action-oriented style, that sort of, you might have to hang that up like a jacket and just say, you know what, that's not what's going to work in this situation. And you can ask, is there anything, can we problem solve? And if they're not ready for it, then go, okay, I just thought I'd ask, But it is listening for what they need. And when we're listening to our friends, especially during times of problematic situations for them, that they should do the majority of the talking. And the more that we listen, the more we are communicating to them because we are showing that we care what they have to say. So then, what can we do to become a better listener for our friends if we make these kind of mistakes? Well, I would think that knowing about some of these things can help us be more informed. It can help us be aware of what's going on. We can be more conscious in the choices that we make when listening to others. And essentially what I ended up doing is I reviewed a series of articles online, which are all in my show notes, and they come from Bustle, Elite Daily, Huffington Post, The Guardian, Very Well Mind webpage, and Positive Psychology webpage. And what I did was synthesize all those tips and advice here in one Alysa list, if you will. Here are the things that I would say, and there's 7 ways that we can become better listeners for our friends. So the very first thing we have to do, and keep in mind, this goes back to the definition of active listening, the purposes, the functions, the example with Gareth Reynolds, all of it comes together here. So number 1, you want to focus on your friend. You have to be present and you have to remove distractions. And even though we're doing most of our listening, perhaps online right now through Zoom, FaceTime, and other functions, that we still need to take away any other distractions. Turn the TV off so it's not in the background, not playing games when you're talking on the phone, because even though they might not be able to see you, they might be able to hear your distance because you are multitasking. So focusing on your friend specifically is a critical first step. It's like receiving. You can't take in the information if you're not able to. The next thing is you can show listening through nonverbals. So think about eye contact and making eye contact if you can. Finding it where you look, not looking at yourself on Zoom or FaceTime. It's looking at the camera so it looks like you're looking at your friend. It might be a good start. And then there's something called immediacy. And immediacy is where you show, perhaps through facial expressions, leaning forward with body posture, leaning towards a friend instead of away. It shows that you're interested, involved, and that they're important. Okay? You remain open. So again, you're not sure what the outcome is going to be, but you go on that journey with your friends and you suspend judgment. And so there can be a lot of situations that you might not agree with, but that might not be the time in which to share that information. So what would you do if a friend came to you and said that they had an affair? Do you immediately say, that's wrong, and da-da-da-da-da, or do you listen to what they have to say and then help them with their feelings and maybe talk about it with them at a later time, or it's about listening to them, helping them. So we cannot express that judgment, right? Or at least that's what the goal of friendship or part of the function is, that we are non-judgmental. And so giving our friend the benefit of the doubt, it's not like, oh, you just murdered someone. Interesting. Tell me more. No, that's not it. But we as humans, again, are not perfect, and we make mistakes and things happen to us, and we need our friends to be there for us. And so remaining open is going to be a good way to show that you're there for them. Number 4, although I don't like the word actually, I've included it here. Actually listening. And that is where you wait to give advice or try to fix the problem. You don't immediately do that because that might not be the goal of the conversation. And so if you are someone who's action oriented, you might be more aware of that and say, I'm generally more action oriented, but I know right now you need me to be there for you. So if you do want to brainstorm, you let me know. Otherwise, I'm listening, right? Vent away, friend, vent away. I am here to take it all in. Number 5, like Gareth might do, ask some significant questions. You need to deepen the understanding of what's going on, and you can ask about feelings and do so with empathy. And here's one of the things that we often don't do is being silent. We want to sit in their space with them, even if it's uncomfortable. So we're not pulling them up right away into our space. We're going to sit in theirs. And it might be yucky and it might be dark, but they might need us to be in that space so we can help pull them out of it. And this is also don't interrupt. Your story can be told at another time. Okay. And then, of course, avoiding the listening mistakes that Brigitte Olin had talked about in positive psychology, not doing the I have a similar experience competition or the one-upping or trying to turn everything to be positive, that sometimes we need to sit in the dirty negative stuff before we can get to the happy positive stuff. And I really like this tip from the Very Well Mind webpage article by Elizabeth Scott from 2019, and that is, quote, let things even out over time, end quote. So what does this mean? This means that at one time, it might be all about your friend and you're listening to them and you're not sharing a specific experience or bonding with them because you've had a similar story. The idea is that you're there with them. It's their turn. They need you now, right? And at another point, they'll do the same for you, right? And so that's the idea. Things will even out over time, right? And so some people might be struggling, and you can be there to listen, and then when you're having a struggle, they'll be there for you. So friends, what are your experience with listening and friendship? What examples of good listeners do you turn to for inspiration? And do you have any cool stories about an awesome listening friend? I would love to hear about it, and you can let me know at bestforeverspod@gmail.com, or you can interact with me on any of the social media platforms I'm on, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at bestforeverspod. I would love to hear more about it, and I do have more listening episodes in the works, so please stay tuned for that. So until next time, friends, think about if you're truly listening to your friends, because without our friends, who'd we be? Thanks for listening to Best Forevers. If you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe, rate, review, and of course, share with a friend. Please be sure to follow Best Forevers on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Best Forevers Pod, and I'm at Dr. Alysa Lucas on Twitter. You can always find the podcast webpage for more information at bestforeverspod.com, and share your stories of friendship by emailing me at bestforeverspod@gmail.com. And if you'd like to support the movement to love on our friends more, check out the podcast on patreon.com/bestforeverspod. Now, friends, check out this recommended podcast that you must get in your ear holes immediately.
Hey, my name's Paul, and I'm not an animal expert.
I'm Donna, and I'm not an animal expert either.
And together we do a podcast about animals called Varmints.
Every week we pick an animal, do a bunch of research on it, and bring you some interesting facts about that animal.
But we don't stop there. We talk about that animal in movies, TV, and other pop culture.
And we talk about whether or not that animal would make a tasty dish, and how intelligent we think it is on the scale of 1 to 10.
It's exactly like one of those fancy PBS nature documentaries.
Except with more poo jokes.
New episodes go live every Thursday wherever you find your favorite podcasts.
Or you can visit us at blazingcariboustudios.com.
Varmints! Varmints!